Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's learn about the famous Australian writer, Patrick White. Patrick White, 1912-1990. Full name, Patrick Victor Martindale White. Born in 1912 in Knightsbridge, London, England, then moved to Australia as a child and identified deeply with the country. He came from a wealthy Anglo-Australian family with pastoral estates in Australia. He was raised in Sydney but educated partly in England and Switzerland. He studied medicine briefly, but he loved to study art and literature in Europe, especially in London and Paris. The exposure to European modernism, philosophy, and avant-garde arts during the 1930s influenced his literary style and thematic concerns. Now let's analyze the literary career and style of Patrick White. Patrick White began writing in the late 1930s with early works heavily influenced by European modernist writers like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and Marcel Proust. Patrick White is known for highly experimental narrative techniques, including stream of consciousness, interior monologue, non-linear time structures, dense symbolic prose. His writing often demands active reader engagement due to its complexity and layered meanings. Now let's analyze the major themes in Patrick White's works. Spirituality and mysticism. Patrick White's works often explore deep spiritual and metaphysical questions, searching for transcendence beyond a mundane existence. He is influenced by Christian mysticism and existential philosophy. Alienation and outsider status. Central characters often feel isolated or marginalized from society. The artist and the thinker as outsider is a recurring motif. The next theme is the Australian landscape. The land is not just a setting but a living presence in his novels, often reflecting harshness, beauty, and a spiritual challenge. The vast outback and a rural Australia symbolize both the opportunity and existential struggle. The next theme, identity and self-discovery. Exploration of personal, sexual, and national identity with a keen sense of ambivalence toward Australian culture and society. Human relationships. Complex portrayals of love, power, and family dynamics and sexuality, including nuanced depictions of homosexual desire, which was radical for his time. Social critique. Dissection of Australian middle and upper classes, exposing hypocrisy, materialism, and a social rigidity. Existential conflict. Characters often wrestle with the questions of meaning, morality, and mortality. Now let's analyze the notable works and their significance. The first one, The Living and the Dead, 1941, is Patrick White's debut novel. It explores the tension between European and Australian cultural identities. The next work, The Tree of Man, 1955, celebrated for its epic portrayal of a couple's relationship with the Australian land. It explores themes of resilience, marriage, and a human condition. Now the next work was 1957, based loosely on the explorer Ludwig Leichhardt, and it dramatizes a journey into the Australian interior, symbolizing spiritual quest and a human limitation. It is highly regarded for its lyrical prose and a symbolic depth. The next work, Riders in the Chariot, 1961, interweaves the lives of four outsiders to explore spirituality, suffering, and a redemption in a fragmented society. The next work, The Eye of the Storm, 1973, a family drama that explores power, death, memory, and the impact of aging and mortality on human relationships. The next work, The Fringe of Leaves, 1976, examines survival and identity through the story of a woman shipwrecked in an Australian wilderness. Next work, Memoirs of Many in One, 1986, is Patrick White's autobiography offering insights into his personal life, literary philosophy, and the cultural context of his work. Now let's analyze the philosophical and literary influences of the writer Patrick White. Patrick White is strongly influenced by European modernism and symbolism. He is deeply engaged with existential philosophy of Sartre, Kierkegaard, and Christian mysticism, influences from the works of St. John of the Cross and other mystics. His works are often compared to those of Dostoevsky and Kafka in the psychological depth and existential concerns. Interest in Greek tragedy and a myth as a way to explore timeless human dilemmas. Now let's analyze the personal life and a social context. Patrick White is openly gay, though he lived in a period when homosexuality was largely stigmatized and criminalized. This made his treatment of sexuality subtle but groundbreaking. Despite his social status, he was critical of Australia's parochial and conservative cultural norms. Patrick White is known for his reclusive nature and intense privacy, but also for his passionate advocacy for Australian arts and culture. Patrick White was never married. His relationships and private life remain less publicly documented, but were influential in his writings. Now let's analyze the legacy and influence of Patrick White. Patrick White was awarded with the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1973, the first Australian to receive this honour, recognizing his powerful contribution to world literature. His works helped establish Australian literature on the global literary map, breaking away from colonial influences and stereotypes. He inspired generations of Australian writers to experiment with a narrative form and explore deeper psychological and existential themes. The Patrick White Award, established in 1974, continues to honour Australian writers of outstanding merit who may not have received due recognition. His influence extends beyond literature to Australian cultural identity and a national consciousness. Now let's have a look at the critical reception. Early criticism found his style difficult and dense, but over time he gained recognition as a master of psychological and spiritual depth. His work is studied in literary criticism for its modernist techniques and thematic richness. He is seen as a pioneering figure in exploring the tension between individual identity and societal expectations. Now let's analyze the key ideas and contributions of Patrick White. Patrick White saw literature as a vehicle for spiritual exploration and existential inquiry. The artist as a visionary figure, often alienated but essential for cultural insight. The Australian landscape as a potent symbol of human struggle and transformation. Writing that transcends mere storytelling to engage with the profound metaphysical and ethical questions. Now let's analyze the main works of Patrick White and the themes. The first one, The Living and the Dead, 1941. This debut novel explores the clash between European and Australian identities through the lives of an Australian couple living abroad. Themes include cultural alienation and the search for belonging. The story examines the complexities of selfhood against the contrasting landscapes. The next work is The Armed Story, 1948. The novel follows Theodora Goodman, a woman whose mental state deteriorates as she journeys through Europe, confronting memory and identity. It explores themes of madness, existential isolation, and the fragmentation of self. Theodora's inner life and a subjective reality are central to the narrative. The next work is The Tree of Man, 1955. Focusing on an Australian farming couple, this novel portrays the relationship between humans and the harsh Australian landscape. Themes of resilience, love, and mortality permeate the story. It reflects on the intimate bond between people and place, emphasizing the cycles of life. The next work was 1957. Based loosely on the explorer Ludwig Leichhardt, the novel depicts Boss's spiritual and physical journey across the Australian outback. It grapples with the themes of ambition, human limits, and a mystical transcendence. The relationship between Boss and Laura reveals emotional and existential depths. The next work, Riders in the Chariot, 1961. This complex narrative interweaves four marginalized characters in Sydney, exploring themes of suffering, spiritual redemption, and social alienation. Each character embodies different aspects of outsider experience and a mystical insight. The novel meditates on the possibility of grace amid cruelty. The next work, The Solid Mantler, 1966. The novel centers on twin brothers, one successful and the other intellectually disabled, illustrating contrasts in human nature and a psychological complexity. Themes of duality, family bonds, and a personal identity dominate. It explores how opposing forces coexist within individuals and a society. The next work, The Vivisector, 1970. This novel follows an artist's lifelong quest for truth and artistic authenticity. Themes include the sacrifices demanded by creative genius and the tension between personal and artistic life. The protagonist's complex relationships reveal the cost of uncompromising dedication. The next work, The Eye of the Storm, 1973. Set during the final days of the powerful matriarch, the novel examines family dynamics, mortality, and power struggles. It explores themes of memory, legacy, and the fragility of human connections. The story critiques social pretenses and exposes raw human emotions. The next work, A Fringe of Leaves, 1976. The narrative follows Ellen, a woman shipwrecked on an Australian coast, and her encounters with the indigenous people. Themes of survival, identity, and cultural confrontation emerge strongly. The novel challenges colonial narratives and highlights personal transformation. The next work, The Twyborn Affair, 1979. This novel follows the gender-fluid protagonist, that is Toby or Twyborn, exploring identity and transformation across time and continents. It addresses themes of gender, sexuality, and self-perception. The narrative's shifting perspectives examine fluidity and our social roles. The next work, Memories of Many in One, 1986, is Patrick White's autobiography, reflects on his life, literary career, and philosophical beliefs. It offers insights into his creative process and personal struggles. The work reveals his thoughts on spirituality, identity, and the role of the artist. The next work, The Hanging Garden, 2012, posthumously published. This play delves into themes of memory, loss, and reconciliation through the story of a dysfunctional family. It reflects on death and forgiveness with a poetic intensity. The characters grapple with unresolved grief and hidden truths. The next work, The Season at Sarsaparilla, 1962, a play. A satirical play critiquing Australian suburban life and social conformity. It explores themes of hypocrisy, middle-class values, and personal freedom. Characters navigate societal pressures and the search for authenticity. The next work, The Ham Funeral, 1947, a play. This play blends absurdity and tragedy, focusing on a funeral attended by a cast of eccentric characters. Our themes include death, art, and human folly. It challenges traditional theatrical forms and exposes existential concerns. The next work, Night on Bald Mountain, 1964, a play. A psychological drama exploring power, manipulation, and a spiritual decay within a family. The play probes human cruelty and redemption. Characters confront inner demons in a tense, symbolic setting.